Y'all are going to holler if you still can't hear me. Thank you for that. Brand new machine. It's going to run Facebook Live sessions a little bit better, but it also means that I had a bit of a technical issue. So hello and welcome to the Adobe XD tips and tricks. My name is Dani Beaumont. I'm a product manager on the team. In these occasional sessions, we focus on different features that we've recently released. I serve as a release captain on the XD team, so I'm involved with building out a blog and launch videos. So it's always fun to do this. For this week's session, as we start out here, we're going to focus on designer to developer workflows. So ways that if you work with a developer and you use XD, you hand off that content. Alternatively, if you're a developer, how you can take content from people that use XD and move it into your development process. So with that said, let's go ahead and switch over to the XD application. Okay, as I mentioned, we are going to jump in specifically on the workflow area for handing off content to the development process. As I proceed here, what I'd like you to do is if you have questions, go ahead and throw it into the chat pod. I can keep an eye on that, and I am joined by my colleague who can help there a little bit more. All right. Thanks for bearing with me on the audio issue. I'm glad we're good. Okay, so I have a design here, kind of this demo asset that I tend to use to show off some of the XD features, and I've prepared it to go off into the development process. So in order to do that, I would work on my design, obviously, and I do that in the design mode of the application. Once I've done the design elements, in essence, I then come in and define a flow. So you can see that I've defined wires that flow from one artboard to another, and those wires have different things going on. I'm showing off different types of gestures like tap, being able to click a mouse or a trackpad, drag, being able to drag between screens. There's also auto animate that's included here. I next would go through such an asset like this and start to prepare which content I do want to hand over to my developer. So the first thing I'm giving my developer is a sense of how the design should work, how elements fit well together in the flow of my design. In this example, it would be a mobile application. I also can come in here in the application and decide which assets get exported. So if I come into an individual artboard that I have here and make sure I'm here on the layers panel. So if I go back over to design mode for a moment here in the layers panel, notice that as I click on some of these elements, I have the ability to come in and mark those for export. So if I were working with a developer, chances are with this flow, all I need to do, if you notice as I step back here, I've got UI elements like this compass here and the search field. I would probably export those just once or mark them for export just once because I don't necessarily have to keep marking them across all of my assets. What I do want to do is make sure that for any one artboard that has SVG content, images that I want to hand over to developer, that I have flagged them in some place or some way there. Notice that this individual component is called compass. If I wanted to, I could also just come here into the search field and type in compass and make sure that across all of my artboards, I've gone in and marked those for export. So if it was important to me to just confirm that each one of those artboards had this marked for export, I can come in and mark it here as I've filtered through the layers panel. That's one way that I come through and mark individual assets that I want to work with. The releases all blur for me a little bit because we've delivered so many releases in such a short period of time. But earlier this year, we wanted to improve the ability to actually access mark for export. So there are more than one way now to actually do that marking. So let's say I came to this magnifying glass and selected it. I can come to the assets panel or to the layers panel here and mark it there as usual. But alternatively, if it's easier for me, I can come over here in the properties inspector towards the right-hand side and mark that individual item for export. The nice part about using the properties inspector as compared to the layers panel is I can select multiple objects. So let's say I also wanted to come in and select this image and a second image here in my layout. I've got these placed as, it's a larger group that's only visible at certain parts of the artboard. But with both of those selected, rather than trying to deal with juggling the selection on the left-hand side, I can do a bulk override or a bulk mark to mark all of these for export by clicking it here on the right-hand side. So that's another approach that I can take. From there, as a designer, I may want to push or I may want my developer to pull. And there's kind of different workflows for that. Once I know I'm all set, I might come in and select all the artboards that I'm focused on, or I can just select everything in the project. Let's assume for a moment I just want to select this flow. Under File here, I have the ability to come in and export my content. And notice that I can choose, is it going to go ahead and export all artboards in the project or just the selected set that I've gone in and selected? If I go with selected, I can now come in and just create a directory of my content. I might go, let's just say, we'll keep life simple here and go to my desktop computer and set that as a destination. I can come in and create a folder so that it's not a mess. So we could call this Compass, export. And then within that folder, I have the ability to decide the destination. So it is one thing that I, as a designer, want to basically flag for my developer, either as I export here or if I hand off using design specs. So notice here under format, I can come in and choose what destination or what format I want for the content that I'm working on. Let's say I flag this as an iOS prototype, which it is. I can then control which format I want to work with there for the exported content. I can also decide if I want to work with Retina or high DPI devices by setting 2x or 3x resolution. Now, this resolution is going to rely on the source content that I've placed. So if when I was designing my site or my iOS application, if when I placed assets, I made sure to place high enough resolution assets that I scaled down to, let's say, 50% of actual size when I placed them, those will have the data or the information to give me the 2x or 3x resolution. It's not going to upsample an image, so to speak. So it's going to match whatever resolution is there or subsample that resolution if I have more data than I needed based on the destination that I do define here. So that when I now say export, it's going to go on in and export all of that content into that directory. We can even switch over quickly to my desktop view. And let's go right there to that desktop. Here's my Compass export folder. And notice that I've got content that has been exported. For anything that I did flag that was a graphic in essence, I have the 1x, 2x, and then 3x resolutions for that visual file. For things like an SVG, if I were to export SVG content, that's going to be resolution independent, so I don't have to have the multiple resolutions. All right, so that's one story or one scenario for my workflow. If I'm going to have to ignore Slack there for a moment. If I am working with a developer and I'm not sure about the file formats that that developer wants, then there's another path that I can take, which is as a designer, I'm still going to come in and flag anything I want exported, but I'll pretty much leave it at that. The next thing that I want to do is actually employ design specs as a handoff for that developer. So to do that, I'll just come on in and select the flow that I want to work with. I'm going to switch over to prototype mode. Notice that I've set the home location here towards that screen. Now, this is incredibly interesting. Sorry, bear with me a second. Let's get that terrible shot of me sitting there in the corner out of the way. So here in my flow that I have at this point, I'm ready to hand that off. I'm going to make sure that I've set the home location as that upper left-hand corner. With that set, I'm going to come over to the upper right-hand corner, and under Share, I want to click on Share for Development. Okay, so when I do that, I can secure it. I can put a password on it. I can also invite by using an Adobe ID, something called a named invite, which makes sure that only the person who has that username and password as their Adobe ID can log in and access the secure design spec that I'm handing off. Notice that I have an option in this area here to determine what I'm exporting that content for. So this, once again, is where if I know I'm going to work with, let's say, an iOS device, I can come in and flag that. And that's important as I do hand off to my developer. In the area below that, I can come in and decide if I do want to include those assets. So within this, 15 artboards here, I've got about 109 assets that are going to get exported. I'm going to go ahead and update the link that I defined. I had defined it a little earlier as a test this morning. We'll go ahead and let that republish for a moment. Now, roughly speaking, if we switch back over to that Finder that we had seen before with that directory, the files that we're talking about being exported are the files that I'm looking at here. Okay, but the way it's being handled is it's going to be integrated with that design spec process. It looks like I've got one question from Mon Novel. I'm going to pronounce your name wrong. Is character animation possible in XD? No. You can use, XD is a prototyping tool. As a designer, there is something called Auto Animate. And Auto Animate is a pretty interesting, amazing, simple way to animate transitions between objects. And if you go to Behance, if you also come under XD here to File and go to UI Kits, and then go to More UI Kits, you'll see there are some examples of Auto Animate in action, defining some micro interactions. As far as character animation goes, you can build out a prototype if you have pieces and parts that you want to show an animation. XD is probably not going to be the tool that you would use if you have to go in and build out a character animation, but you could communicating using Auto Animate to some extent. But again, the idea is to just quickly communicate a transition between one state or another using Auto Animate. Okay, keep the questions coming. I like them. All right, so we've gone in and published up that design spec. I'm going to now go in and take a look at that. So if I click on Share for Development once again, notice that when I publish that up, I get a URL that I can bring up. We'll go ahead and open up that URL. Now, I'm kind of excited / nervous. We'll see how the crowd is going here with folks. And that we delivered, I think it was just last Monday or Tuesday, we delivered the latest release of Adobe XD. And we made some change to the behavior with the way the designers and developers work together. So one thing that we've heard is that when you hand off a design spec to a developer, that developer had to work a little too hard to come in and understand the flow of the design. So what ordinarily would happen is, as a designer, if I wanted to share my prototype flow and my specifications, I would have had to publish out 2 different versions in XD. So when I'm back in the XD application, if I wanted my developer to see the flow I had in mind, I could use Share for Review to build a prototype in the browser that I shared. And I would also use Share for Development to hand off the specifications. We listened to that request, and what we did is basically merge the 2 together. So when I now share a prototype, so Share for Development, if I switch over to that browser instance, I can see indeed that I have an artboard that's here. Notice that I'm in, if I close this out for a moment, I have sort of my default mode. And this is very consistent with prototype mode in Share for review, basically, in that I can come in and interact with the design. So it's as though I were just looking at the prototype. I can see the drag gestures, I can see the animations, and the real flow that I have going on here. That's now part of design specs. As I am looking at this as a developer, if I want to now drill down on an individual artboard and see specifications, I can come here to the panels here on the right-hand side and click on the spec toggle in essence. That will bring up specifications for that particular artboard. Now, as I'm working, if I have questions, let's say I want, as the developer, to ask the designer some questions, I can bring up the review panel as part of this and come on in and add some comments. So I might not like some aspects of the design or be concerned, is this a solid or a gradient, for example, and I could submit that to the designer as a comment that can be tracked. At the same time, as I mentioned, I can jump over to the spec view and probably answer that question very specifically. So as I'm here now, I can start to hover over to see the sizes of certain elements. Clicking on them is going to give me their dimensions, their X and Y locations. So these specifications are available to me in this spec view. In addition to that, if I click off so that I have more of a broad view of the current artboard, I can see a lot of other details. So I see the viewport size as compared to the design size. So if there is a very long artboard that has a viewport that's set for something shorter, I can see that. This is where I see the assets that I exported. So some of them are white assets, I think, on a gray background, so they're a little tough to see here. But I can come into any of those individual assets as a developer now and start to decide how I extract that content. So I might say, sure, go ahead and give me these 3 photos, and I'm coming in to click on them in the browser. So I've selected them in the browser. Having done that, I can now come in and decide, how do I want these to export? In the drop-down, I can decide, is it a PNG or a PDF file? Again, this is specific to the iOS environment, so it's going to give me assets that would be appropriate for an iOS. I can come in and then download those assets directly as I'm working. In addition to that, I have color values that are here, character styles that are in use, and then some interactions. So if there were truly a gradient in the background here, I would see it in the description. Because this is just a photo that may have had a gradient applied to it. It's not a gradient overlay, and I can see that in the specifications. All right, so one thing that we changed last week is we merged prototypes and design specs together. We also made a change that we've heard back from the community that you're not exactly as excited about. So what we did is, there used to be, if you can imagine with me, if you're not familiar with this, there used to be at the root level, when you worked on a design, a flow that would show you all of the artboards in one screen, and you could see the links between those artboards so that it was easy to understand which artboards might be linked to other artboards. So in the case of this design, I have, for example, if I go back over to the prototype mode here, this design has a keyboard here, right, that comes up on each screen as I'm working. And that keyboard is linked to all of the artboards in the design. And we used to have the ability to see that. We changed it to a different view, what we call the grid view. And we've heard from users that they're not thrilled with that they miss the ability to see the relationship of all the artboards to one another. So rest assured, it's something that we're working on right now. I'm not certain exactly when you'll see it come back, but the idea is that we're going to bring back more of a toggle experience that allows you to toggle between the grid view that we've just implemented and more of the relationship view where you see all of the thumbnails together. To get to the grid view, what I can do is come here towards the upper left-hand corner of the browser and click on that grid. So this is the new grid view. We were pretty excited about it, and I think it does have its value, but not in replacement of the other view that we have, more in addition to. So when working with this new grid view, I have the ability to come in and see which pages might be, or which artboards might be related or tied to the main artboard I'm working on. And I can get there by clicking on this icon here. Notice that as I click on different ones, there are different artboards that are linked to one another. Again, this is not quite the same as seeing all the artboards in one place. So that'll be the view that will come back very shortly. I do have the ability to come in and see anything that's linked. I can also click on any one artboard to jump right back into the flow to that particular location. So it does serve as kind of a finder or simple navigation to see where I am in relationship to the design. Okay, so as I mentioned, keep your ear to the ground. Our intention is to roll those two together as we work going further. What else can I cover here a little bit? So I'm open to questions as we go along. Looks like I've got one from Bjorn. If there are more questions, go ahead and throw them into the comments here. So Bjorn wants to know, is it possible to export your design as code after making a prototype and using things like auto animate? So the answer is no. The point with XD is really to create a prototype experience that you can create and show very quickly. Having said that, there are some forays that will make the transition from here to a coding environment easier. And in the spirit of keeping your ear to the ground, we're working on some nice capabilities that do allow someone who is creating code to get more information than I'm showing you right now. I'll tease you with that. So what I would suggest is if you are interested, you can reach out to an Adobe person that's on the XD team, me perhaps. My email is dani@adobe.com, D-A-N-I, and request to be included in our private pre-release program. We are currently testing some really fun stuff that allows designers and developers to work with one another together. That test is not yet live in the pre-release, but I think we'll see something in the next few days. So definitely some fun stuff there. I'm not going to overly tease you though. What we're not doing is letting you push a button, swing over, and see a fully coded interaction. That will not be true anytime soon. But there are some on-ramps that allow you, if you are familiar with coding, to have some of the pieces or parts that are communicated in one of your specs actually give you a little more information based on the environment that you are developing. So with that as a teaser, the answer is no, we don't generate a full site, but we are doing more and more to help in that handoff. Another way that we hand off content, depending on your development environment, is by way of a plugin architecture. So when I'm in Adobe XD, we have actually exposed the plugin panel more lately here as a side panel. When I click on Discover Plugins, it takes me to all the plugins that are here. And there are development partners that work closely with XD, depending on that development environment. So tools like Jira, Simply, ProtoPie, Avocode are all development environments that do an elegant handoff from XD to that development environment. Again, there is not a plugin that just says, work like magic, please, and make or code up a site for me, or give me the starting points for, let's say, a mobile app. That is still something that you do with a developer. Okay. Next question. Sean, how far away are hover over effects? I can't tell you that. I can open my eyes really wide, but I can't tell you that but I think you should keep your ear to the ground as well. And it's good to know that it's something you're interested in. It's something that we know you're interested in, and it's something that we are thinking about pretty heavily lately. Um, let's see. Looks like that's it for questions that are coming in from the crowd. I've eaten up my half hour of time, so I'm probably going to go ahead and stop at this point. Um, the only thing that I will lead off with or end off with is if you want to watch some of these recordings, if you go to just look for Dani and Adobe XD, if you go to Ping Dani, Pingdani, on YouTube, I've saved out a playlist of all of these recordings. I also have a playlist of all of, in fact, I'm just going to go there because life is short. I'll make sure I go to the right place on YouTube real quick because I think this is a good resource for you if you're new to XD or want to know what's going on here. So let's see. As I mentioned, there's a number of good buckets of information here. Any of the tips and tricks sessions that I've recorded, we've saved out here and they're available. In the Adobe XD What's New section, you can see each of the new features as we deliver them. I think we're up to about, I think we're up to 60 new feature videos that are here. And then if you're brand new to XD, the Getting Started series will help you just introduce you to the tool in about 10 steps with a demo asset. So I'm going to leave it at that. I will be back next month with another tips and tricks. If you have questions, if you have ideas for topics you'd like to see covered, please feel free to reach out to me. As I mentioned, email is dani@adobe.com. Don't spam me, but let me know what your interests are. We'll see what we can do. Thanks, everyone, for your time.